Hey there, and welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
Today we are taking a monumental swing at one of the biggest questions in economic history.
Yeah.
Really big.
Oh, yeah. Which one's that?
Why, and maybe more importantly, how did Europe become one of the most developed, wealthy, and technologically advanced regions on the entire planet?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a vast question. I mean, the answer involves weaving together, 5 centuries of history, economics, intense rivalry. It's a lot.
It really is. And you're looking at a region that's, geographically speaking, quite small.
Tiny almost compared to other continents.
And culturally fragmented, too. Dozens of languages, different states. Yet somehow it managed this transformation, unmatched, really, in speed and scale.
Right. And that transformation is absolutely key because we need to remember the starting point. The Europe we see today, sophisticated, wealthy.
Yeah.
It's radically different from the Europe of, say, 600 or 700 years ago. It wasn't always like this, not even close.
That's a crucial point. If you were a global observer back in, 1400,
Yeah.
your focus probably wouldn't be on Western Europe.
Definitely not. You'd be looking east. The brilliance of Ming China, perhaps.
Or the wealth of the Ottoman Empire.
Exactly. Or the intellectual hubs in the Middle East. Europe back then? Oh, for hundreds of years it struggled a lot.
We're talking constant wars.
Constant warfare, yeah. A really decentralized political scene.
Yep.
Repeated disasters like the Black Death, wiping out huge parts of the population.
Famines, too, right?
Famines were frequent. Political stability. That was more of a dream than a guarantee for many places. Europe simply wasn't the global economic engine room.
So the core question we're trying to unpack here is, what changed? What actually shifted that trajectory? What specific sequence of events allowed this collection of, often struggling kingdoms to not just catch up, but to hit this kind of sustained, almost exponential growth?
Well, that's what we're going to chart, piece by piece. And we'll start with the foundational move, the thing that kind of broke Europe out of its regional box.
Which was?
Turning its gaze outward, successfully making itself the hub, the center of a new globalizing world economy.
Okay, let's get into that shift. Our sources really point to the 15th century, the age of exploration. That's the pivot.
It really is. But it's important to understand this wasn't just about, curiosity and drawing maps.
Yeah, it feels like that sometimes in the history books.
Well, there was curiosity, sure. But first and foremost, this was a massive, aggressive economic operation. The sources are pretty explicit. It was driven by the search for new ways to make money.
Right. And why the sudden push then? What was the context?
Think about the existing trade routes, especially for those really valuable goods like spices from Asia.
Hugely profitable.
Immensely. But getting them to Europe involved going through various middlemen, often Italian city-states like Venice or Genoa or empires in the Middle East.
So lots of markups along the way.
Exactly. European maritime nations looked at that and saw two things. A huge cost eating into potential profits and a massive lost opportunity if they could just bypass them.
Go direct. Cut out the middleman.
That was the driving force. So you see countries like Portugal, then Spain, later Britain, the Netherlands. They started pouring enormous national resources into this.
Often driven by the crown, right? Royal mandates.
Very often, yes. Pioneering these new global sea routes, creating new connections across the oceans, linking up continents in a way that hadn't been done before, and crucially, making it a European-centric system.
So the first time?
For the first time on that scale. And this whole movement, it wasn't just random exploration. It was underpinned by a very specific economic philosophy.
Which was?
Mercantilism. We have to talk about mercantilism. This wasn't free trade as we think of it today.
No, quite the opposite.
It was state-controlled. It was viewed as a zero-sum game. The idea was that there's a fixed amount of wealth in the world, measured primarily in gold and silver.
So the goal is to get as much of that pie as possible for your nation.
Precisely. Maximize your exports, sell stuff to others. minimize your imports, buy as little as possible from others, and control colonies entirely for the economic benefit of the mother country. It was economic warfare, essentially.
Okay, so you have this state-driven, competitive economic model. But these voyages, they were incredibly risky, right?
Yeah.
And expensive. How did they actually finance these massive undertakings? One ship lost at sea could bankrupt someone?
Absolutely. And that's where a crucial innovation comes in, an institutional one. Individual merchants, even wealthy ones, couldn't realistically fund these long-distance, high-risk ventures consistently.
So what changed?
The rise of joint stock companies. This was revolutionary.
Like the East India companies.
Exactly. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, and the British East India Company, the EIC, are the textbook examples. They were groundbreaking.
How so? What do they do differently?
They allowed investors, lots of investors, to pool vast amounts of capital together. So instead of one person risking everything on one ship,
You spread the risk.
you spread the risk across hundreds, even thousands of shareholders. If one ship went down, it was a loss, but it wouldn't wipe out the entire venture or any single investor.
That makes sense. It institutionalized the funding.
It did. This pooling of private capital, often with state charters granting monopolies and significant powers, allowed these companies to fund huge fleets, build fortified trading posts overseas, even raise small private armies.
Private armies, wow.
Oh, yes. They were managing global operations on a scale that often exceeded what the Royal Navies themselves could do alone at the time.
So it's like a public-private partnership almost, geared towards economic expansion.
In a way, yes. A private engine driving state-sanctioned economic dominance. And the mechanism for accumulating wealth through this system, it's just staggering when you look at it.
What came first? What were they bringing back initially?
Initially, it was about immediate high-value goods, gold and silver, particularly from the Americas, after the conquests there.
Right, the Spanish galleons.
That influx fundamentally changed Europe's financial liquidity. Suddenly, there was much more hard currency circulating, and spices, of course, from Asia, still incredibly valuable, luxury goods worth immense sums back in Europe.
So quick, high-profit items first.
Yes. But then the focus started to shift. Once those initial treasuries were, let's say, established, and the routes became more routine,
They moved on to other things.
they moved towards bulk commodities, importing raw materials on a massive scale, specifically things like cotton and sugar, often from plantations relying on enslaved labor.
And this is the link to the next phase, to industrialization.
It's a crucial pre-industrial link, absolutely. Having access to this huge volume of cheap, exploitable raw materials, combined with the capital they'd already accumulated from the gold, silver, and spices. That provided both the necessary feedstock and the investment funds for the technological leaps that were just around the corner.
Okay, so the wealth is pouring in. What's happening back home in Europe itself? Did this money just pile up in royal palaces?
No, not entirely. And this is where our sources emphasize a powerful feedback loop. The wealth didn't just sit there. It had to be managed, it had to be transported, insured, financed, defended.
Which requires infrastructure.
Exactly. It drove huge investment in infrastructure. You see the birth of the modern financial world taking shape right here.
How so?
Well, this massive influx of global capital led to the explosion of commercial cities. Think London, Amsterdam, Lisbon, Antwerp. They became these buzzing centers for banking, finance, insurance.
Because you needed ways to handle all this new global risk and money.
Precisely. You needed sophisticated tools. Things we take for granted now were being developed or refined then.
Like what?
Marine insurance, for example, to cover the very real risk of losing ships and cargo at sea. Sophisticated letters of credit, allowing merchants to conduct trade across vast distances without hauling chests of physical gold around.
Much safer, I imagine.
And more efficient. And the institutionalization of long-term borrowing, government debt, all these financial innovations created the stability and reliability needed for continuous capital investment on a global scale.
So, the ports get bigger, the financial houses get more sophisticated.
The legal systems adapt to handle complex international contracts. It all builds on itself. Europe fundamentally restructured its economic gravity. It went from being, a relatively poor, struggling periphery.
Compared to China or the Ottomans.
Right, to becoming the unavoidable center, the hub of a rapidly growing global economy. The age of exploration, through trade and these new institutions, provided the financial capital, the fuel, really, that the next engine of development, internal competition, would use and multiply dramatically.
So the key takeaway here isn't just that they found wealth.
No, is that they figured out new, highly efficient institutional ways to manage that wealth, multiply it, and deploy it strategically. That was critical. Okay, so that financial foundation from global trade, absolutely necessary. But it wasn't the whole story, not by a long shot.
Because other empires had wealth, right? China had immense wealth at various points.
Yeah.
The Ottomans, too.
Exactly. Many large empires possessed vast resources, but they often lacked, well, let's call it the engine for sustained, exponential, almost self-correcting development. And that brings us to Europe's unique internal structure.
Which was?
Relentless, intense political competition. Fragmentation.
This is where Europe looked really different from those other large empires you mentioned.
Critically different. We noted earlier, empires like the Ottomans or the various dynasties in China were generally huge, centralized, somewhat monolithic states.
One dominant power, more or less.
Right. Europe, by contrast, it was a patchwork quilt, always divided into many smaller kingdoms, principalities, city-states, constantly jostling, competing, sometimes cooperating, often fighting.
Squabbling, basically.
Squabbling, yes.
Yeah.
And while that sounds like, and often was, a recipe for instability and near constant warfare.
Which seems bad for development.
You'd think so. But the analysis in our sources suggests this constant tension, this rivalry, actually served as a kind of massive pressure cooker. It drove development in ways that stability sometimes doesn't.
How did that work? Pressure cooker for what?
For everything. For science, for technology, for military tactics, finance, even art and culture. If one state got an edge, the others had to scramble to catch up or risk being overshadowed, or worse, conquered.
So if France developed a better cannon,
then England, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, they all needed to figure out how to build one just as good, or preferably even better, and quickly.
this created a sort of built-in mechanism against stagnation.
Exactly. Stagnation was dangerous. This constant pressure created a pervasive culture where progress, improvement, finding an edge, it wasn't just desirable, it was often seen as essential for survival. Think about the Renaissance and the Scientific Revolution. Why did they take root and flourish so powerfully in Europe?
Go on.
Well, part of the reason is this fragmentation. Ideas couldn't be easily suppressed everywhere at once.
Ah, right. If one ruler, or say the church in one region, decided to ban a certain scientific theory or suppress a new invention,
What could the innovator do?
they could literally pack their bags and move.
Exactly. Go a few hundred miles across a border to a competing state, maybe a rival king or a free city, that might welcome them and their potentially advantageous knowledge with open arms.
So it created an intellectual marketplace where ideas could find a home even if they were unwelcome somewhere else.
Precisely. It punished attempts to enforce rigid orthodoxy across the board. There are concrete examples of this. Think about the flight of talent throughout European history.
Like the Huguenots.
Perfect example. When Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes in France in 1685, ending religious tolerance for Protestants, what happened?
Thousands of skilled Huguenots fled France.
Highly skilled artisans, weavers, clockmakers, financiers, engineers, they didn't just disappear. They took their expertise, their capital, their business networks. Where did they go?
To France's rivals, mostly.
Directly to rival nations. The Netherlands, Prussia, England, Switzerland, places that welcomed their skills and their Protestant faith.
So France basically shot itself in the foot. Experienced a brain drain, a capital flight.
while its direct competitors instantly gained thousands of highly productive, skilled, motivated citizens who immediately started contributing to their host nations' economies and technological capabilities.
That's a powerful illustration of the system punishing suppression.
It wasn't an isolated incident either. It was a systemic risk, or maybe a systemic feature, inherent in Europe's fragmented political landscape. Every ruler knew, consciously or unconsciously, that stifling innovation or persecuting skilled minorities could directly benefit their rivals next door.
And this competition wasn't just about attracting smart people, was it? It was military, too.
Oh, fundamentally military. It was a centuries-long arms race. If one country developed a better shipbuilding technique, stronger fortifications, a more efficient way to drill soldiers, or, crucially, a more effective way to finance a standing army,
Then everyone else had to react.
immediately, they were forced to catch up, copy, adapt, or improve upon it, or risk becoming irrelevant or vulnerable. This constant military pressure made technological and organizational progress an existential necessity, not just a nice-to-have.
Okay, I get the pressure cooker idea. I need to push back a bit here. This constant fracturing, this rivalry, wasn't it also responsible for the endless, devastating wars that plagued Europe for centuries? Wars that surely wiped out progress, destroyed wealth, killed millions. How did Europe manage to innovate while constantly fighting itself?
That's a really important question. And the relationship between war and development is complex, no doubt. The sources don't shy away from the devastation,
Right.
but they suggest that the wars, while incredibly destructive, often acted as unintended catalysts in certain ways.
How so?
Well, for one, funding these increasingly large and expensive wars required massive amounts of money. This pressure accelerated the development of sophisticated financial systems. National debt, central banking institutions like the Bank of England were established largely to manage and finance government, primarily war debt.
So war drove financial innovation.
It certainly pushed it forward, and critically, wars created urgent technological demands. The military needed better metallurgy for cannons and armor, better logistics to supply armies in the field, more precise navigation, more powerful explosives, eventually faster communication.
The war machine needed constant upgrades.
Constantly. And the intense competition ensured that any military advantage gained through technology was usually short-lived, forcing continuous innovation.
Okay, that connects to the specific example you mentioned earlier about the steam engine. That wasn't initially a military invention, was it?
No, not directly, but it arose from a very practical, competitive economic problem driven by the need for resources which were themselves crucial for national power.
Which was?
The initial urgent need was about getting water out of mines, especially deep coal and tin mines like the ones in Cornwall and Britain. Water seepage was a huge problem.
Limiting how deep they could dig.
Exactly. And whoever could solve that problem, pump the water out more effectively, and go deeper to extract more coal or tin, gained a massive economic advantage. Coal, in particular, was becoming increasingly vital.
So necessity is the mother of invention.
In this case, very much so. Early steam engines, like Newcomen's atmospheric engine, were developed primarily for this purpose: mine drainage. When James Watt later dramatically improved the efficiency,
Making it practical for other uses.
right, it wasn't just a clever invention in a lab, it was the key to unlocking vastly greater resource extraction, which fueled industry, which in turn supported national wealth and power.
And because of that competitive environment we talked about.
Other countries couldn't afford to ignore it. As soon as Britain started demonstrating the power of steam, particularly in textiles and industry, other nations rushed to adopt the technology.
But not just copy it.
Not just copy. They were actively trying to improve upon it, adapt it, maybe find ways to leapfrog the British designs. You see this constant back and forth, this technological race across the channel and the continent.
which dramatically sped things up.
Absolutely. It accelerated the pace of advancement incredibly. It created this self-reinforcing cycle. Competition drove innovation. Innovation provided an edge. That edge spurred rivals to innovate further. An intellectual and technological arms race where the prize wasn't just military victory, but economic dominance.
So you have the capital flowing in from global trade.
Sure.
You have this internal pressure cooker of competition forcing constant improvement.
Check.
This combination, the sources argue, ensured Europe didn't just get rich and stand still. It was institutionally structured, almost accidentally, to embrace novelty and penalize stagnation.
Yeah.
It was ready for the next big leap.
Okay, so the stage is set. We've got the financial foundation from global trade. We've got this relentless competitive engine running internally. The system was primed. And then comes the big one, the Industrial Revolution.
This is the moment. This is where Europe doesn't just become economically dominant, it becomes technologically unique in the world, for a time.
What defined this revolution? What was the core change? Fundamentally, it changed how humans produced things. Forever. We're talking about the convergence of several key elements.
Right.
The systematic use of factories as the main site of production, the widespread application of machines to do work previously done by hand, and crucially, harnessing powerful new energy sources, first coal, powering steam engines, and later the use of steel enabling even bigger and better machines, making goods on a scale never before imagined.
And the core insight here, you mentioned it briefly with the steam engine. It's about breaking free from limitations.
That's it, exactly. It's monumental when you think about it. For the entirety of human history before this, production was limited by the power of muscles, human muscles, animal muscles.
Right. How much one person or one horse could do in a day.
There was a natural physical ceiling on output. The steam engine, connected to machines in a factory, completely shattered that ceiling. It allowed for exponential growth in production, not just incremental improvements.
Can you give an example?
Think about textiles. Before, you had maybe a weaver working at a hand loom in their cottage, producing a certain amount of cloth per day. It was skilled work, but slow.
The artisanal system.
Right. Then you get innovations like Arkwright's water frame, or later the power loom installed in a massive factory building. You could concentrate hundreds of workers in one place, tending machines powered by a single, large, coal-fired steam engine.
And the output.
It wasn't just double or triple, it was orders of magnitude greater, producing textiles, cloth, yarn at a rate and a cost that was simply unimaginable just a century earlier.
Faster, cheaper, and in vastly greater quantities.
That's the formula. And the impact was immediate and global. Europe, particularly Britain initially, became the workshop of the world.
What did that mean for other countries?
Economically, it could be devastating. A country like Britain could now produce cotton cloth, for instance, so cheaply using its machines.
Using raw cotton often sourced from colonies.
Exactly. They could produce it so cheaply that they could ship it halfway around the world and still undercut the price of locally produced traditional hand-woven textiles in places like India, which had previously been renowned for its high-quality fabrics.
So it actually destroyed existing industries elsewhere.
In many cases, yes. It fundamentally reshaped global trade patterns, creating a new dynamic where Europe supplied manufactured goods and other regions increasingly supplied raw materials.
And what about the changes within Europe? This must have caused massive upheaval.
Huge societal transformation. On the one hand, economies exploded. New types of jobs were created: factory workers, engineers, managers, railway workers. National wealth grew dramatically.
But it also triggered massive migration, right?
Absolutely critical point. We saw this enormous, unprecedented movement of people from the countryside, from agricultural work on farms, into rapidly growing towns and cities where the factories were located.
Urbanization on a massive scale.
Yes. And these weren't the old, relatively small pre-industrial cities. These were new industrial behemoths. Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Essen in Germany. They grew incredibly fast, often chaotically.
Which created entirely new problems.
Entirely new systems were needed just to cope. logistics for feeding these huge populations, basic sanitation, housing, policing, social organization. It completely redefined what a city was and how it functioned.
Now, looking back from today, we can't talk about this industrial explosion without acknowledging the human cost.
Absolutely not. The sources are clear on this, and it's vital we include it. We talk about economies multiplying, jobs being created, but the dark side was very real and vividly documented by contemporaries.
Workers suffered immensely.
Terribly. We're talking incredibly long hours, dangerous factory conditions with little or no safety regulation, very low wages, especially for women and children who were employed in huge numbers.
And the pollution.
Rampant pollution. Coal smoke choked the air in these new industrial cities. Rivers were poisoned with industrial waste. The environmental impact was immediate and severe. The profits generated often came at a staggering internal human and environmental cost.
There was resistance, too, wasn't there? It wasn't all embraced as progress.
Definitely not. You see cultural resistance and real social trauma. The most famous example is probably the Luddite movement in England in the early 19th century.
Who were they?
They were typically skilled textile artisans, weavers mainly, whose traditional livelihoods were being destroyed by the new factory machines.
And they protested.
They protested by smashing the machines. They saw these looms and frames as the direct cause of their unemployment and hardship. It wasn't just mindless violence, it was a targeted protest against the technology they felt was replacing them and destroying their way of life.
That Luddite reaction really highlights just how disruptive this change was. The speed and scale of it must have been terrifying for those caught on the wrong side of it.
It was. But despite these very real costs and the resistance, the overall result from a global power perspective was undeniable.
What was that?
This new industrial power gave Europe an enormous head start, as the sources put it, a technological and economic lead that no other region could match at the time.
And this head start wasn't just about making cheaper shirts, was it?
Oh, no. It translated directly into military power. Industrialization meant better steel production.
For guns, for ships.
Exactly. Better, more powerful armaments. Faster, more reliable steam-powered naval vessels that weren't dependent on wind. Rapid communication systems like the telegraph, allowing for command and control over vast distances.
So by the mid-19th century,
by the mid-1800s, no other region on Earth possessed the capacity to seriously challenge the combined military and industrial strength that European nations could project globally. They could build more, faster, and project power further than anyone else.
And this dominant position, this overwhelming lead, that became the prerequisite for the next stage, didn't it? When that really cemented Europe's global position.
Yes. It directly enabled the massive expansion of formal colonial control in the late 19th century. The tools forged in the Industrial Revolution were immediately turned outwards.
Right. As we move into discussing colonialism, it's impossible to understand Europe's development trajectory without it, and the sources insist we address this uncomfortable truth directly.
Uncomfortable because it complicates the narrative.
It fundamentally complicates the narrative that this was all just about internal factors, about genius or innovation happening in isolation. Europe's rise was structurally deeply tied to exerting power, control, and often exploitation externally.
So this is where the internal engine, the competition, the industrialization meets external leverage. That enormous head start we just talked about.
The steam engines, the advanced weaponry, the rapid production, the financial systems.
It wasn't just kept for domestic use. Not at all. It was immediately and systematically applied on the world stage. This is the era, especially the late 19th century scramble for Africa, but also across Asia and the Americas earlier, where European nations used their power to build vast, formal empires.
How did this exploitation actually work? What were the mechanisms?
It was layered. It wasn't just one thing. European nations used their overwhelming military and economic strength to, first, gain political control. Then they used that control to reshape local economies entirely for their own benefit.
So controlling markets and extracting resources.
Yes, but it was more systematic than just taking stuff. It was institutional policy. They took resources, absolutely minerals like diamonds and gold, rubber, tin, copper, timber, agricultural products, often with little compensation or through forced labor systems.
But also controlling the markets. How did that work?
They ensured that colonized regions became primarily sources of cheap raw materials for European factories, things Europe needed for its industries. And simultaneously, these colonies became captive markets for expensive European finished goods. Local industries that might have competed with European manufacturers were often actively suppressed or discouraged through tariffs, regulations, or lack of investment.
So it's a double whammy. Cheap resources flow out, expensive goods flow in.
Precisely. It created a closed loop that massively benefited the European economies. Think about the advantage for European industries. They got their essential raw materials, cotton for textile mills, rubber for tires, palm oil for soap, at incredibly low prices.
Because they controlled the source and often the labor.
Right. This kept their production costs down, making their goods even more competitive globally. And then they had guaranteed buyers in the colonies for the things they produced. The profits flowed back to Europe.
Unprecedented profits, presumably.
Huge profits, which were then reinvested back in Europe into more factories, better infrastructure at home, research, education, raising living standards, reinforcing that virtuous cycle of development within Europe.
But if it was a virtuous cycle for Europe, what was it for the colonized regions?
That's the crucial contrast. For the colonies, it was often the opposite, a cycle of enforced disadvantage. Their economies weren't allowed to develop naturally or pursue their own industrial path.
Infrastructure was built in colonies, though, wasn't it? Railways, ports.
Yes, but look at how it was built. The railways, for instance, were almost always designed purely for extraction. They ran from the interior, where the mines or plantations were, directly to the coastal ports.
To get the raw materials out.
Exactly. They generally weren't built to connect local markets within the colony or to foster internal trade or industry. The infrastructure served the colonizers' needs, not the colony's balanced development.
So this actively prevented them from following Europe's path.
This systemic constraint, this reshaping of entire economies to serve external needs, meant that many regions were actively prevented from industrializing or developing diverse, complex economies in the same way Europe had. While Europe was busy accumulating capital, building sophisticated financial systems, and advancing technologically.
Others were being locked into the role of raw material supplier.
Systematically locked into that role, often for generations. It created a huge divergence in economic trajectories.
So colonialism wasn't just a sideshow to Europe's development.
Not at all. Our sources frame it as a fundamental part of the economic engine. It functioned as this massive economic transfer mechanism. It sucked wealth, resources, and sometimes human capital from the global periphery.
Africa, Asia, the Americas.
And concentrated it in the European core. This process didn't just help Europe get ahead, it actively widened the gap by holding other regions back, cementing Europe's dominance for centuries, and arguably reinforcing structural inequalities we still grapple with today. It's a critical and often deeply uncomfortable part of the answer to why Europe developed.
Okay, so Europe builds this unprecedented position. Global trade dominance, fueled by internal competition, supercharged by industrial power, and then amplified and locked in through external colonial exploitation. An incredibly powerful combination.
Almost unassailable for a long period.
But empires rise and fall. Fortunes can be fleeting. The question now becomes, how did Europe manage to sustain this success over the long term? What made it stick?
That's where we need to look beyond just the economic and military factors, crucial as they were. We need to look at the final layer, the underlying structures that provided stability and enabled continued growth.
Which are?
We're talking about governance, law, education, and eventually even cooperation. The long game.
So investment beyond just factories and armies.
Exactly. The sources point out that early and sustained investment in what you might call the invisible infrastructure was key. things that support long-term, stable growth.
Like what specifically?
High-quality public education systems, relatively speaking for the time. Reliable civil infrastructure, not just ports, but roads, sanitation, public utilities, and, really importantly, stable and predictable systems of governance.
Let's unpack those governance systems. What were the crucial elements there, according to our sources?
The list includes the gradual spread of democratic principles, even if limited initially. But perhaps even more fundamentally for economic stability, the establishment of the rule of law.
Why is the rule of law so vital for economic growth?
Because it reduces uncertainty and arbitrary power. If you have a system where laws are applied relatively consistently, where contracts are generally enforced by impartial courts, where private property rights are reasonably secure.
People are more willing to invest.
Exactly. An investor, whether local or foreign, feels much more secure putting their capital into a long-term project, building a factory, developing a mine, setting up a trading house if they believe the rules won't suddenly change overnight, if they trust that a powerful ruler or a corrupt official can't just seize their assets on a whim.
Predictability is key for business.
It's essential for complex, long-term economic activity. This legal and political stability, even with all its imperfections, provided a foundation for continuous rather than just sporadic economic growth and investment.
And you mentioned education and science, too.
Yes, the promotion of scientific inquiry, often linked to universities, created this engine for ongoing intellectual progress. European universities, especially from the 19th century onwards, increasingly adopted models that combined research with teaching.
Producing skilled people.
Producing a steady stream of highly educated scientists, engineers, doctors, lawyers, administrators. This continuous supply of human capital was essential to keep driving innovation, managing increasingly complex systems, and staffing the institutions of state and commerce. It kept feeding that competitive fire long after the initial breakthroughs of the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, so strong institutions, rule of law, education. That builds a solid foundation. But then Europe goes and nearly destroys everything, twice.
Right. The sources absolutely have to address this. After achieving these unprecedented levels of development, Europe then plunges itself into two absolutely devastating world wars in the first half of the 20th century.
Wiping out unimaginable amounts of wealth, infrastructure, and human life.
Catastrophic self-destruction. And how Europe responded to this crisis is also a critical part of the story of its sustained position.
That was the response.
Rebuilding, obviously, but rebuilding with a significant shift in mindset, particularly in Western Europe. A move towards political cooperation rather than the relentless rivalry that had characterized previous centuries.
And the prime example of this is
the creation of what eventually became the European Union, its predecessor structures, specifically.
It didn't start as the EU we know today, though.
No, the initial steps were deeply pragmatic, almost mundane, but politically ingenious. They didn't start with grand treaties about shared values or human rights.
What did they start with?
They started by tackling the very tools of war. The first major step was the European Coal and Steel Community, ECSC, in 1951.
Why coal and steel?
Because those were the absolute essential raw materials needed to build tanks, guns, ships to wage modern industrial warfare. The ECSC placed the coal and steel production of key member states, critically, including France and West Germany,
Historic enemies.
under a common supranational authority, higher than national governments for these specific sectors.
What was the effect of that?
The political outcome was profound. By pooling control over the essential ingredients for war, it made another war between France and Germany, the nations that had fought three major conflicts in the previous 80 years, not just unthinkable, but physically and economically almost impossible.
Wow. So it locked them together economically.
It institutionally turned old enemies into trading partners, as the sources say. Instead of spending vast sums on military buildups against each other, those resources could now be channeled into rebuilding, into civilian prosperity, into shared infrastructure projects, into research and development.
Creating a new kind of virtuous cycle, based on cooperation this time.
Exactly. This final layer, this commitment to structured cooperation, managed to solidify peace and anchor prosperity in Western Europe for decades after the devastation of the wars. It demonstrates that while that fierce internal competition might have been the engine for the initial breakthroughs,
The ultimate stability, the lasting success.
that was secured through developing highly sophisticated systems of governance, upholding the rule of law, investing in people, and ultimately finding ways to manage conflict and maximize shared economic benefit through political unity. It's the capstone on the structure. Tag outro.
Okay. That was quite a journey through 5 centuries. A tremendous unpacking of history, economics, technology, power.
It's a huge story.
So if we try to boil this all down, synthesize it for you, the listener, what's the final crystallized understanding of why and how Europe developed the way it did?
I think the clearest takeaway is that it's not down to one single magic bullet. There's no single factor you can point to.
No silver bullet.
No. Europe's status today is the result of a dynamic, complex, interlocking mix of forces playing out over a very long time. It needed that initial financial leverage from global exploration and trade.
Right, the capital accumulation.
Then it needed the relentless pressure cooker of internal political and military competition to drive constant innovation and prevent stagnation.
The engine.
Then came the exponential leap in productive capacity from the Industrial Revolution, changing everything.
The technological game changer.
Underpinned throughout by evolving structures of governance, law, and education that provided stability and nurtured talent.
The foundation and framework.
And then, layered onto all of that, and inseparable from it, were the massive economic advantages derived from centuries of colonial power and exploitation.
The uncomfortable truth.
It's a permanent part of the historical equation. You have to include it to get the full picture.
So it's a really complex story. Progress, yes, monumental human achievement in many ways, but also deeply intertwined with conflict, exploitation, and transformation that had winners and losers both within Europe and globally.
Absolutely. It's not a simple or necessarily uplifting story in all its aspects, but it's a historically crucial one. And maybe that leads us to a final thought, something for you, listening, to consider. Development, as the European experience seems to show us, isn't just about finding gold or inventing a steam engine or even just accumulating wealth. It seems to be fundamentally about how societies institutionalize learning, how quickly and effectively they adapt to new technological possibilities, new financial realities,
And how they structure themselves.
and perhaps most critically, how they structure their relationships both internally through things like law, governance, and social contracts, and externally through global trade, cooperation, or historically control. How those connections and structures evolve or fail to evolve over generations seems to be at the very heart of why some regions surged ahead when they did.
Adaptation, learning, connection, structure. Something to definitely mull over, especially as the global economic and technological landscape continues to shift so rapidly today.
Indeed.
Well, thank you for that incredible tour through history and economics, and thank you all for joining us for the deep dive.